Wonderful AP Human Geography students. This is Dr. Carol Gillespie, and I'm ready to talk to you a little bit about language. This is an important part of our culture. Um, Ba'ash Ka'aba, what's your name? Ish Ka'aba Carol. My name is Carol. Bashkamente Baha, what did you do today? I just spoke Mayan, Yucatec Mayan, which is an interesting language because it uses glottal stops, which is what happens inside your mouth when you go, uh oh, to eat, to eat. You stop the sound halfway down your throat. It's called a glottal stop. Anyway, I a few years ago did some research in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico among the Yucatec Mayan people. And I learned enough Spanish, I had enough Spanish in my vocabulary, which many of them speak Spanish, and I also had enough Yucatec Mayan thanks to the anthropologist who was leading the research study expedition. So I was able to communicate somewhat with the people, and what an awesome experience that was. But anyway, language is one of the cornerstones of national identity, cultural unity, and community cohesion. It is the single most important cultural glue. And a glue is something that binds the culture together. Because without language, there would be no culture. Language is the method of human communication, either in written form or spoken form, whereas culture is the idea, the values, and the beliefs we have in our society. So we need the language to communicate those beliefs and our culture. People have very strong feelings about their language and they identify with it. People might be persuaded to change their religion, but not their language. When a people's language is threatened, the response is often passionate and very protective. Thousands of languages are spoken in the world today. Linguists or language experts estimate between 5,000 and 6,000 languages are spoken in the world today, and they serve as both unifiers and dividers of humanity. Ironically, all languages may have a common origin. Human languages, even those spoken in pre-literate societies are those in which people speak their languages, but they do not write them. Even in pre-literate societies, languages are fundamentally different from those of non-human primates. Human languages are not static. They don't remain the same year after year. They change constantly because a vital culture requires a flexible language, and the potential vocabulary of any language is infinite. We could have so many words in a language, infinite possibilities. Mature and complex cultures, which are usually found in technologically advanced societies, they attempt to keep a standard language maintained by national institutions and official state examinations. In the modern world, where innovations diffuse very rapidly, such standards are difficult to uphold. One problem that arises is just who decides what the standard language will be. Not surprisingly, the answer has to do with influence and power, circumstances that often produce problems in a world where cultural identity and national self interest are increasingly important. Language classification uses terms. I'm going to talk a little bit about the classification of language. And it uses terms that are used also in biology and for the same reasons. Some languages are related and some are not. Language families are thought to have a shared but fairly distant origin in the language subfamily. And subfamilies are divided into language groups. Language groups consist of sets of individual languages. So I'm going to show you a language tree. This visual shows the distribution of 20 major language families. On this map, only the Indo-European language family is broken down into subfamilies. Spatially, and you can pause the video if you want to look more closely at this visual language tree. But spatially, the Indo-European languages are the most widely dispersed throughout the world. Half the world's population speaks the language from the Indo-European group of languages. More people speak languages that belong to this language family than those in any other family. And there are good reasons that this pattern is in place. When the European migration of immigrants and colonists spread over the world during the last 500 years, one of the cultural components that spread with them was their language. Add to this the fact that indigenous or native populations were virtually wiped out in the Americas and in Australia, and their languages wiped out with them, and the European desire to spread the Christian faith, usually in the language of the European culture invading the area. And so that helps you to understand the patterns on this map and makes it much easier to understand. Now let's look at the major world languages. This graphic shows in using circles to denote the number of native speakers, but we can see that Chinese, most of who speak Mandarin, is spoken by more people than any other language. You see that great big circle right here. Mandarin Chinese is the #1 spoken language, and Spanish is #2. You see the Spanish circle right here. The numbers, however, should be viewed as approximations only. English is still the primary language of 350 million people in 6 major countries and many, many smaller countries that have millions of inhabitants. English is also used as a second language of hundreds of millions of people, 978 million to be exact. And these speakers are in India, Africa, and elsewhere. And English has become the principal language of cross-cultural communications and in economics and in science. So in a world where rapid communication and travel is becoming more the norm than the exception, this has some benefits. We have no such thing as a global language, at least not officially. So if you would think about the possible problems on an international airline trip where you have the cockpit crew speaking one language and the airport control people speaking another language. Well, fortunately, there is supposed to be an English-speaking person in the cockpit and in the control tower on every international flight. English is also spreading with the World Wide Web, at least to countries where there is no access, where there is access to the internet. So the relative ease with which English can be picked up, especially when you compare it with a relatively complex Chinese language, is and the influential soft power of the U.S. culture, means that English will continue to dominate the world stage for the foreseeable future. For some, English still means opportunity and a better quality of life. And we are still the number one country here in the United States where people want to come to and emigrate to improve their lives. If we were only to look at native speakers, and these are people who speak it as their first language, their native language. Spanish has its nose in front of English with about 471 million speakers. If you want to learn a language that will open up continents to you, Spanish is the one you should choose and learn. It's your best bet. As with all the languages we're talking about today, the politics of language and associated identity are highly disputed. Ask the Catalan or the Quechua speakers if Spanish is their local tongue, and you will get a very different answer. But it certainly is the primary language of most of South America, Central America, Spain, and large portions of the United States. Now let's look at India. Here is our map of India. India has 23 official languages, with the golden section, the Hindi language, and Urdu. Hindi and Urdu is the official chief language. Whether this is one language like Hindustani or two dialects, which are two versions of the same language, is still fiercely debated. But Hindi is spoken mostly in northern India and parts of Pakistan. It uses the Devagni script, while Urdu uses the Persian script. The debate about its role in Indian education and society has once again flared up. Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, is a Hindu nationalist, and he is trying to have Hindi displace English in the southern Indian states as the primary language of official communication and education, a strategy that has been met with resistance. If you ever travel in the Indian subcontinent, a little Hindi will get you a long way. Plus, Hindi is the language that gave us the words shampoo, jungle, jodhpurs, and bungalow. So what's not to love? The present distribution of languages as revealed on maps is useful in understanding cultural development and change. The four Dravidian languages are all spoken in a compact region in the southern part of the Indian subcontinent. The map thus suggests these languages, which are older, and the cultures that they represent were pushed southward by the advancing Indo-European speakers. Similar interesting patterns can also be observed by looking at the spatial pattern of the Germanic and Romance language subfamilies. The last graphic I want to show you and share with you, and again, you can pause your video to take a few notes if you like, and then continue, is the top 10 languages by total number of speakers chart. When we count the top 10 most spoken languages, according to the total number of people who speak them, whether or not it's their mother tongue, 8 of the most spoken languages still make an appearance, but with a few major differences. English narrowly edges out Chinese for the top spot of most spoken. Japanese and Punjabi lose their spots. French and Indonesian join the top 10 most spoken, thanks to the fact that more people speak French and Indonesian as a second language than as a native language, which is interesting. There are more people speaking French as a second language than as their native language. Very interesting. Well, I hope you have gained a little more insight into the importance of language as we study culture. Talk ulakain. See you later. Have a great week and keep studying. You're doing fantastic.